today's Viewpoint.
And good morning and welcome into the Wednesday morning Viewpoint for this Wednesday morning, November the 7th, 2018. I'm your host, Randy Williams, and today, as we have been talking about for the last, actually over a month now, we have as our guest this morning, Attorney Richard Moore, the U.S. Attorney for the Federal U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Randy. Pleasure to be with you. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to your listeners.
A little unusual, in that it's refreshing that you're taking a proactive approach to come into this part of your district to let people know who you are. So let us know who you are and what you do and what is the scope of your office and your priorities.
Sure. I should say that I have one of my veteran federal prosecutors with me this morning, Gina Van. She is one of our lead trial lawyers, been our criminal chief, and Gina is going to be spearheading our effort here in Selma, and she's a real asset to me. So sometimes folks get what the Attorney General for the state of Alabama, for example, Steve Marshall, now just elected yesterday, and they get that position confused with the U.S. Attorney or the District Attorney. So the U.S. Attorney is appointed by the President, and for us in the state of Alabama there are three. Jay Towns in the Northern District of Alabama, the Middle District is Lewis Franklin, and I'm in the Southern District of Alabama. The Southern District is 13 counties basically south of Montgomery on the western side of our state, from here down to Mobile. Mobile and Baldwin County are our most populous counties, as you probably know. In fact, we have about, I think, 77% of our population resides in those two counties alone. So Selma and our what we call our northern division here of our southern district makes up a small percentage of the overall population. And traditionally we have spent most of our time, our effort, in the southern part of our district down in Baldwin County and Mobile County. But we have in our office about 25 lawyers. Most of those are criminal prosecutors. They're called assistant U.S. attorneys. Some are civil attorneys who handle matters that are not criminal. We have an office here in Selma at the federal courthouse. We've had that office for years and years. We've never had a lawyer stationed here in Selma before. We've never had what they call a manned office. I've been talking about the fact that we're in the process of changing that. We're going to have a lawyer, prosecutor here full time. We've applied to Washington, the Department of Justice, to get the approval necessary and the funding that we need to do that. And that's because of some of the issues that I'm sure we'll talk about here this morning. And I just say, just personally for me, I was a federal prosecutor in the office for 18 years, started in 1985, and then I was appointed as the Inspector General for the Tennessee Valley Authority in 2003, and I was in that position in Knoxville, Tennessee for 14 years, and then came back home to do this. I was confirmed by the Senate last September.
Was that a grueling process, your confirmation, or did you get under the radar screen?
No, there are no hearings for U.S. attorneys. It's not like the Kavanaugh hearing by any stretch of the imagination. And it was fairly non-controversial for all of us. Jay Town, who's a good colleague, as well as Lewis Franklin, good friends, we all came in on what we call the first wave of U.S. attorney appointments.
Now, and this is for our audience for clarification, when you talk about the difference between criminal and civil, what type cases, let's start with civil first, what type cases traditionally, what you handle under the title of civil cases?
Sure. So our civil lawyers defend the interest of the United States, and particularly are trying to protect the treasury of the government. We're sued, the federal government is sued from time to time. If you have a U.S. postal employee in a mail carrier car that has an accident and there's an issue about who did it. Sometimes we'll end up being involved in those kind of suits. In the bankruptcy court, sometimes we have tax liens that we're trying to enforce in the bankruptcy court, for example. So those are the kinds of things that we do. So
it's more of a defense role, and some prosecution, I guess, in terms of the not bankruptcy, but if you're trying to get somebody's property, or as you just explained, but so you're more defense as opposed to prosecution with civil.
Most of the time, sometimes we're on the offense. If we have, for example, a federal civil claim against, let's say, an organization that runs hospitals or provides some kind of medical care, where there's been allegations of fraud, overcharging, those kind of things.
Right.
May not be a criminal case, but it's a case where the federal government has paid for hospitalization for Medicare, Medicaid patients, that kind of thing, and we've been defrauded as the government. So our lawyers would file a civil lawsuit to recoup our money for the federal government.
Do you ever get involved in municipalities? I mean, do you ever have cases where you have city or county governments that get investigated or prosecuted by your office? Is that typical?
If there's, for example, an allegation of corruption where a public official is taking a bribe, that would be a federal offense that would be criminally prosecuted. And we have traditionally investigated, the FBI generally investigates those cases, and the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecutes those. I know back in the late 80s in Mobile, we prosecuted state court judges, mayors, police officers, district attorneys. I prosecuted the school board president for taking bribes back then. So yes, we know how to do those cases, and generally it's the FBI that does the investigation, brings those cases to us.
Are they generally initiated by citizens or anonymous sources, or by the ABI or FBI, or how does that process get started usually?
A variety of ways. A lot of times we have what we call confidential informants, and they're in a position where they don't necessarily want their identity known, and they come to us and give us information. It's our job to kind of wade through the evidence and make a determination of whether there's really something there that's worthy of the investigation, worthy of us going after. But we're very serious about integrity in government. And on the one hand, you don't want to witch hunt, you don't want to be tarnishing people's reputations carelessly and unnecessarily. On the other hand, we are the ones who would prosecute those kind of cases.
That's interesting. Which leads into the criminal aspect. I know you do the drugs, and I would imagine murders, and I guess one of the concerns that I hear that comes up on a regular basis is that if a person witnesses a crime, that they are afraid to report it because they are afraid that their identities will be exposed, and then somebody may retaliate against them. How do you handle that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's understandable, and it's a difficult problem. We try to work with folks who are, for example, a witness to a crime, like you suggest, whose identity may become known. And in some cases, in order for us to bring justice, we have to have that person's testimony. But if we do, we try to be as careful as possible to protect them and do what we can. We can't make promises that we can't keep about somebody's safety, but we try to make sure that, first of all, the bad guys out there, the criminals, who would harm a witness, know that it will be scorched earth if they do that. I'm not sure we've done a good enough job with that, and I intend for us to do better.
We're going to hold the calls for a few minutes and let people, we're going to give you an opportunity to call in and ask some questions as well. You had a press conference that you were a part of a couple of months ago. That's where Ms. Van and I met, in fact, and it was a joint effort with Aaliyah, I believe it was, and ATF and in the Drug Task Force
Right.
in the City Police Department. What was your role in that? What is your goal, and have you had any success? Has it bore any fruit?
I would say yes, and as you probably remember, Randy, the ATF director there was talking about the average number of felonies that those folks that we arrested and had indicted in that particular roundup had. I don't remember the exact number, but
it was a ridiculous number. I've
yes,
forgotten the number.
Several more.
A couple of hundred, was it?
Well, the per defendant, I want to say it was 2 or 3. The average was close to that. So what, to answer your question, when we're getting folks off the street who are what we call the shooters, the trigger pullers, I mean the people who, first of all, it's illegal for them to have a firearm because they have felonies, and they've demonstrated that they will shoot you, kill you. They are a high risk to society. The best thing the U.S. Attorney's Office can do, local law enforcement people, is to get them off the streets as quick as possible. So we're starting to do that. We've got a lot more to do. There will be some news about more that we have done, maybe even toward the end of this week. We're going to continue to do that, but there's a lot to be done here in Selma.
And we want you to know today, we want you to certainly make sure that whatever it is that the community can do to help you and to help facilitate that effort, we want to make sure you get that information out. I know that law enforcement has to be frustrated when, if you lock up and if you successfully prosecute a violent criminal that's committed some murder or some other heinous crime, and then 18 months later, and sometimes 6 months later, they're back out on the street on bail. You know, when I thought the whole purpose behind bail was that they look at, from what I'm told by judges and by other people in law enforcement, they say, well, we look at, do you present a threat to the community, and are you a flight risk? And some of these people, it's just obvious to me that they're both. But they let them right back out. How do you combat that? How can the community combat that kind of a situation? I'm talking about violent criminals. I'm not talking about the low-level non-violent crimes. I mean violent people that have a history of violence, as you just explained.
Well, I mean, first of all, you can be real careful about who you elect as your local judges, there is in regard to bail, there is a presumption of bail for criminal defendants. But as you suggest, when somebody is a flight risk or they are a proven danger to the community, they shouldn't be released either on the state side or the federal side. So I think in terms of what the community can do, what voters can do, is look carefully at local judges' records on those kind of things. And each case is different. Judges, I think for the most part, try to make these decisions in good faith. But I think when there's a question about why was somebody released who has, 2 prior felonies, violent felonies, and they're involved in, the allegation is that they're involved in shooting or murder and that kind of thing. I think it's fair for the community to ask, why was this person released?
875-1490 is the number to call if you have comments or questions. Now I'm going to let you ask the questions, folks, of the U.S. Attorney. This is your chance to get some answers or to ask some questions and let him know who you are, and not know who you are in terms of your name, but let him know who we are as a community. Viewpoint, you still there, caller?
promotion from Nike. Papa John's.
Sorry about that. Okay, that call is gone. 875. I'm having a little problem with my speaker here in the studio, as we do from time to time. 875-1490 is the number to call if you have comments or questions. Now, we just came out of an election yesterday, in fact, and so what do we have? 4 years, or maybe 2 years before the next election cycle. But does politics, in any kind of a way, tie your hands? You know, when you're trying to get an initiative going, and do you have projects that you can fund? And is that a possible restraint when you're trying to get things done?
It hasn't been for us, Randy. You know, law enforcement, people really, my experience, particularly on the federal side, are apolitical. There are people that I work with, I couldn't tell you if they vote Republican or Democrat, and you know, they just want to do the right thing for the community. So there's difference in emphasis on some programs depending on who's in the White House. But I'll just tell you, in terms of Selma and what the U.S. Attorney's Office can do, money's not the issue. I'll tell you what the main issue is. It's whether this community has the will to support law enforcement in us doing our job. Now, having said that, I think we have to go first. And that's what I'm intending to do. When I say go first, I mean, I think we on the federal law enforcement side have to demonstrate that we're committed to Selma, that we know what we're doing, we're capable of bringing a higher level of safety to the streets of Selma, that we're here for the duration and we're not just parachuting in. That's what I'm interested in, is seeing what we can do that is sustainable. Now the reality is, while we can take these shooters off the street for a while, and we can hold back the water, so to speak, the tides, for a while, in the end, whether Selma is reborn, so to speak, and comes out of this, will depend on the community coming together. And so part of what my mission is as U.S. Attorney is to ask people to come to the table, whatever differences people have in the way of politics or factions or personalities or whatever, to leave that at the door, and us all figure out a way to make Selma what I think we'd all like Selma to be.
You know, I remember that there was a time when there have been several initiatives, and it was difficult for the various law enforcement agencies to work together because of sometimes the heads would be territorial. Who's in charge, or who's going to get credit, or whatever they go through. And but I didn't see that at the press conference. I saw a different, you know, kind of a spirit with you guys. And what can the community do to make sure that this happens, to help facilitate? And before I do that, I was curious, when you talk about, I'm sure that you have experience with a town like Mobile, and I guess Pritchett is in that same. Wasn't Pritchett having a lot of problems at one point?
And still are, and we're working some initiatives down there. We're having, I mean, there's similar problems with there being too many high-powered weapons in a community where there are drug dealers, and that being a lifestyle that's emulated by teenagers. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems we have, is these folks coming out of the penitentiary and arming up teenagers. We're going to have to figure out a way to address that. It's very difficult for us on the federal side to prosecute minors. So
that's why they use them.
That's why they use them. That's why that information has been passed on to the felons. They know that. So that's an MO that they have. But that's just one problem that we have, that we can figure out a way to get at that. And in terms, Randy, of what the community can do, we are in the process of bringing different people together and asking them, so what do you think the problems are? What do you want us to do for Selma? can we agree on some basic things that need to be done? I think, again, we need to go first in law enforcement in terms of us stepping up and doing the right kind of things, and then we need to ask the community to step up and help us. And it goes back to this question about, if people have legitimate reasons to be fearful of being a witness in one of our cases, how do you address that? So that's a case-by-case kind of.
Can you testify and your identity not be known to the accused?
No.
You gotta be.
No.
You gotta see your accuser's has the right.
And under our Constitution and just a matter of due process and fairness, the accused is entitled to know who is it that is bringing testimony against him or her.
Wow.
So that's a real issue. What we need to do is convince the citizens that we're more powerful than the drug dealer, and that we will win in the long run. And if they support us, the city will be safer. We've got some catching up to do here, I think.
That's interesting. Viewpoint, you're on the air, caller. Yeah, turn your radio down just a little bit.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. You're on the air. This is who? Oh, the birthday one. Okay, you got to come by the station and pick up the certificate. Come by the radio station and pick up your gift certificate. Just give them your name. They should have it. If you have a problem, let me know.
Okay, come by the radio station.
Yes, sir. 505 Lauderdale Street. All right. Thank you for calling. Now sometimes when the lines get quiet like this, they're listening, and I don't want you calling me tomorrow and asking me a question that should have been asked to the U.S. Attorney, because I won't be able to answer those questions. He's here now, and so now's your opportunity. 875-1490 is the number to call if you have comments or questions. But now, as people know, you're welcome to call and talk about anything. I know there's some other things on folks' minds this morning. How does Selma rank? In this area rank in terms of the level proportionally of crime with some of the other areas that you're responsible for?
It's much higher.
What?
It's much higher, and it's way too high. I couldn't give you specific numbers about that. Pritchard in Mobile County, as you have suggested, Randy, is a similar kind of situation. It just seems that, particularly with having police officers shot at, seemingly the shooters not being concerned about what might happen to them by shooting at a police officer.
Yeah.
We haven't seen that, for example, in Pritchard. That's going to be a priority of mine, to make sure the word gets out. If you fire on a police officer, if you shoot a police officer, we will come for you. We'll make that a priority. All law enforcement.
It's awfully bold. I mean, the other thing is, how is it that we would allow our officers to be outgunned? And, the last officer that was shot at, I understand, had requested a bulletproof vest for up to a year and still had not gotten it. Now, why that is, if it's funding or, if it's a low priority when they're, and that's the kind of stuff that I hear, that there are other officers that did have vests who had been there for a shorter period of time. It's just a good thing that he wasn't killed or maimed, and so, but is that a financial issue in terms of the vest? I mean, what happens if a city says, well, we don't have the money, for weaponry and for the proper uniforms to protect our officers? Is there anything that the federal government can do to help?
Yeah, so we're going to be having those kind of discussions with the city, because there are federal programs where you have a particular situation like Selma, where you can get grant money and program money to address those kind of things. I'm talking to people who are in a position on the federal side to help with those kind of things. I'm talking to the local city officials about what the needs are. We can do better. And when it comes to protecting our police officers, we need to do everything that we possibly can. And this is not just a Selma problem. So the law enforcement on the perimeters of Selma and neighboring counties, even as far as over in Montgomery, have a vested interest in solving this problem in Selma.
I would imagine some of the criminals probably go back and forth between the various locations, huh?
They do. So we're going to be calling on all of them too to help us with Selma.
Viewpoint, you're on the air. Good morning, and speak up a little bit, please.
Okay, let me see if I can do something on this phone. I might have to back to my other one.
Let's go to the next line. You can call back, caller. Viewpoint, you're on the air. 875-1490 is the number to call if you have comments or questions. And so, so you're saying that it's becoming more common for officers to be outgunned in different in Alabama?
I don't know about that, Randy, but I would say that it's way too easy for criminals to get a hold of these high-powered weapons.
How do they do that? That's the other thing. How do we have so many guns in our community? People were asking those kind of questions, you know. And like you said, evidently you just explained something, though, about the teenagers. If convicted felons, and when they get released, are putting these weapons in teenagers' hands because they can't be prosecuted, that may be one way, huh?
It's a problem that we're going to have to overcome together. The state system can prosecute them, but you know there are limits on what can be done even on the state side. So, you know, it's important, I think, for your listeners to appreciate. There's no one single entity or person that can save Selma. I think we all know that. The U.S. Attorney certainly can't do that. I don't have any illusions about being able to ride into town and save Selma. What I do believe is there's enough goodwill of your people here. I've talked to a lot of people that I'm very impressed with. They get, hey, this is a serious situation, and whatever differences we may have had in the past, we better lay those aside and come to the table and figure out how to make Selma safe. As you know, the kind of industry and businesses that we'd like to see come to Selma are not going to come if Selma has a reputation of not being able to provide safety for its citizens.
Yes, sir. Viewpoint, you still there, caller?
Yes.
Okay, how are you this morning?
Fine, how are you, Randy?
Okay, what's on your mind?
Yes, I'd like to ask the attorney more question. I'm concerned too about all the things that are going on in the city. Also in the court system, I just want to ask him one question. If there's a case that's going on and you feel like you're not getting a fair shake from the judge, how do you handle that?
So I would just say it kind of depends on what the court system is. You're probably referring to either a local or state court system. If you feel like a particular judge is not following the law, has disregarded the law, or has acted in some way that is inappropriate, there is a way to file a complaint in the state of Alabama with so there are judicial inquiries about that. So that's one remedy. If you happen to be represented by a lawyer, obviously the lawyer should be able to give you some guidance about what you might be able to do as well.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, and again, from your standpoint, as the from the federal standpoint, and I guess does that put you in an awkward position if you ever get in a position where you have to investigate local judges because there are allegations that say that they're not doing something proper or they're showing favoritism, which I would imagine favoritism is a no-no, huh?
Well, yeah, I'd just say, Randy, you know, we're very careful about not launching an investigation where it's based on, a particular litigant is unhappy with a judge's ruling. And they think, well, this judge must be biased against me, this judge must have taken a bribe, or those kind of things. We hear those kind of accusations from time to time. And it's frankly rare that there's anything to that.
There. What about a right to a speedy trial? What if a trial is constantly being delayed and taken off of the docket, and there are no legitimate reasons for that? What is that? Is that a red flag?
Yeah, it is. I mean, our Constitution provides for speedy trial and our statutes provide for speedy trial for defendants for a reason. But then again, there are legitimate reasons why a case might be delayed. And every case is different. On the federal side, we move very quickly.
In civil and criminal, both?
Well, I'm speaking mostly to on the criminal side, right? We fast track a lot of cases, and our dockets move very quickly.
Viewpoint, you're on the air.
And I'll try to talk louder. Is that better?
Oh, that's better.
Okay, thank you. I want to welcome Attorney Moore to this area, and I surely am appreciative that Selma was chosen this time. Had it been chosen 30 years ago, I think we would have been in far better shape than we are headed now. There have been a lot of, I'm glad you're talking about the criminals, but all of us are not criminals in Selma. And there has been a lot of maneuver, bad actors. You said operate in good faith. You do expect people in office to operate in good faith. But good faith, bad faith has been practiced in Selma for a long time. If there is evidence of certain specific dealings that you've had with the system, are you willing to flesh it out in order to work for the citizens rather than for the misguided government players that we've had in our community?
Well, I suppose I would answer that this way. We've recently had an election, and people have voted their conscience, and that's what the voting booth is for. If you're unhappy with your public officials, that's the way to handle that. If it's a matter of some allegation of criminal misconduct, then that potentially comes to the attention of your district attorney or to me as U.S. attorney. And so let me just say, we can't prosecute our way out of all the problems that Selma has. Gina Van, who's here again, who's with me, he's one of our veteran prosecutors, is an expert and does a fine job in presenting a criminal case to a jury to convict somebody, for example, and she's done this her whole career, somebody who is either robbed a bank or who has a firearm illegally because they're a convicted felon, that kind of thing. But we can't prosecute our way out of this problem. As good as we are doing what we do, this is going to require unity among leadership, and it's going to require effective leadership.
Okay, we need to take a break, caller. You want to ask the last question or make a last comment before we let you go?
Well, I'll be in contact with him because there is quite a bit of evidence of the bad actors. And maybe if they are exposed to the fact that they've done this intentionally in many cases, sometimes just because they were taken advantage of or misused. I just hope that that does lead it to a better community and better fair play. I can tell you many examples, but I'll leave it alone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for calling. It leads me, before we take this break, into one point, and that is that, what I often have observed is that when I see these workshops and town hall meetings and other initiatives, rarely do I see everybody that needs to be at the table at the same time. If mental health and law enforcement and the defense attorneys and the prosecutors and educators, you know, and the police and the community activists. If you can't, and the educators, if you can't get them all at the table to talk, to say what their problems are, how do you figure out what to do?
And Randy, we have a program we're going to initiate that I'll be happy to talk to you about here in a minute. If you, I don't know if you're going to take a break now, but I'd like to talk to you about the Weed and Seed program. That
you're going to bring Weed and Seed back?
We are.
Oh, excellent. I'll tell you what, now I want you to tell people about what Weed and Seed is. I'll tell you what, we're going to take this break because we want to talk to Jackie over at the coffee shop. I'll be there from 9-ish, depending. We may go over a little bit. If we go over a little bit, whatever time we go over, we'll be at the coffee shop for 2 hours this morning. But let's take this break first. And then we're going to hear about Weed and Seed. I'm so glad to hear that Weed and Seed is coming. We'll be about to let the caller get their question. And you still there, caller? Okay, good. Tell us about Weed and Seed.
Yeah, so Randy, you're familiar with it, and this was a program that the U.S. Attorney's Office spearheaded years ago, back in the 80s. I know, particularly in Mobile, I was most familiar with it there. But the premise is, in order to reduce crime and make communities safe, you've got to do both some what they call weeding and seeding. The weeding part is you've got to pluck out the bad actors. You got to get them off the streets. Those shooters, trigger pullers that I was talking about, those are the folks you got to weed out of the community so they aren't terrorizing the community. In terms of the seeding, it's not enough just to get rid of the bad actors. You've got to put something into the community. So the seeding part would be to figure out, okay, what's missing that we don't have in Selma, what needs to be shored up and invested in, and who's willing to do it. So what we're in the process of doing is talking to people in the community to find out who should be at the table, who's willing to step up and help us both with the weeding and the seeding. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to be the U.S. Attorney who turns Selma around. We have a role to play. We're going to do our part. That's why I'm investing the money.
It was here once, and it was effective, you know, for a long time now. And as we were talking during the break, I can do it on the air too, because people that listen to the show know that I have been involved. I've been volunteering with the Craig Pine Glen Homeowners Association, and because there was an elderly woman that was shot, totally innocent, a couple of years ago, Miss Tripp, and for me that was the last straw, you know, because I knew her and was a church member, grew up in the same church with her and all that, and so we knew that we had a problem at Craig, and so and before then I had reached out a couple of years ago. We were trying to do some things, but Weed and Seed had left. So Craig, of course, we've got the Craig Airport Authority, the industrial park, and then right behind the industrial park is the residential area where, when it was an Air Force base, the officers used to live. So you have a combination of homeowners and renters. And at one point it was being terrorized. You know, the level of crime had gotten out of hand, you know, drive-by shootings and, you know, just out of hand. And so now we're at the point where we've got a homeowners association organized, and we're at the point now where we're getting ready. We're going to get some cameras, and we want to build a guard shack at the entrances and be able to document who's coming in and out and help. But it takes money to build a guard shack. You know, Dr. Mitchell over at Wallace Community College, he was also the chair for the Airport Authority, committed to helping us buy the cameras. He said he'd pay for the cameras. You know, so those kind of things, you know, but then there's the educational side. You know, it's okay for us to put people away, but, you know, I don't know if they're being rehabilitated or not, or where the breakdown is there. Short-term job skills training, you know, for people who are falling through the cracks, who don't have a way to make a living. It's, you know, all of that is interrelated, and I guess that will come under the seeding part of what you're talking about.
That's right.
You know.
Yeah, and it's a, you know, I think we're past trying to use just simplistic kind of solutions to a very complicated problem. And just like you suggest, it's not enough just to take the bad actors, the shooters off the streets. We got to think about, okay, they're going to come back at some point. even in the federal system where you get long prison sentences and you take them off the street for a long time. So we should have some preparation on the federal side and the state side for former convicted folks coming out, so that when they re-enter the community, they've got a better chance. Some of them, my experience has been, they like the lifestyle of being a criminal, and that's what they're going to do.
I guess when we were kids, some of us played cops and robbers, and some people never got out of that role, huh?
Right. Yeah, and so you can only do so much, but we've got to have to come together with goodwill and reason together. There are some best practices from around the country that Selma could take advantage of that's just probably not known about here. Because other communities, St. Louis, Missouri, I'm thinking of, and some other places where my colleagues, U.S. attorneys, are wrestling with these problems, they figured out some ways to intervene with gangs, to stop the retaliation, to stop bystanders for the most part from getting shot, those kind of things. So we need to take the best of those kind of solutions across the country, bring them to Selma. There's some programs that have been proven to work. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. So I would say there's three things that we have to have here. One is we've got to start building some trust with each other across the law enforcement community, with citizens groups, people in elected offices. We've got to have some mutual trust, and we've got to have some mutual respect, and we have to have some mutual accountability. As a U.S. attorney, I am accountable to the people in this district. People have a right, even though I'm not elected and appointed, they have a right to expect that the U.S. attorney will be on the job, will be vigilant and vigorous in trying to make their communities safer. By the same token, I think we have a reasonable expectation of each other to be accountable as citizens, elected officials, people in local law enforcement. We'll all be accountable to do the very best that we can. We'll be accountable to each other, and that we'll put aside the kind of rhetoric, for example, that you've heard, particularly throughout this last campaign, that divides us and doesn't bring us together. When you have somebody on the street with an AK-47 that is shooting up a house and you're walking by, you don't really care much about whether somebody is a Republican or a Democrat.
And you don't want to get me started on that this morning.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is we've got to be thoughtful.
Right.
We've got to be more thoughtful.
Intentional, huh?
Intentional.
Well, and that's good, and it's so good and refreshing again that that you're here and that you're planning on staffing an attorney. And I hope Ms. Van will consider coming on one day and doing an interview with us, so people can understand what prosecutors. She looks like she's not a mean looking prosecutor, guys.
Trust me, she'll be mean when she needs to be.
Well, I certainly hope that she'll consider coming back and doing an interview with us one day, so people can get a feel.
She has my permission.
That's what I'm saying.
Anytime you want her, we'll make her available. And she's going to be here working with us until we can get a new lawyer on board. Gina's going to be here a good bit, and we'll have other lawyers who are coming up here. We've got a good bit of catching up to do on the federal side, and so that's why I'm coming up on a regular basis. Gina's coming up. We have other people coming up. So I feel a real personal burden for Selma.
Are you from Alabama originally?
Mobile.
You're from Mobile, yes.
Mobile.
Right. I'm a self-described independent, a registered Democrat, but a self-described independent. And many times I get into conversations about our president. But folks, here we have a U.S. attorney who's been appointed by President Donald Trump, who is here in Selma trying to help us solve some problems. So that's like the answer about, well, what's in it for me? But we're not going to have that conversation this morning because I've got some diehard Democrats that listen, and we often have debates about that. But this is what I mean about an example of how this is what I don't understand about Selma and where we are. I still say I refuse to believe that the political power that has been amassed in the Black Belt of Alabama and Selma being the so-called voting rights capital of the world, that we can't leverage that political power into creating some solutions. And so, so those who have been in power on the Democratic side can't answer that question for me. Nobody can seem to answer the question as to why is it that we're getting worse in an area that has amassed as much political power, at least the reputation for. If you have all this, if we have all of this power and we can't come up with solutions, what good is it? You know, and that's kind of like where I'm at now. Are you still there, caller?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead. How are you this morning?
How you doing?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself? Okay, what's on your mind this morning?
But we see all this stuff should have been here a long time ago. Because when I was saying that all these people got killed, and these folks and starting these folks out and got killed, they ain't got nowhere to put some of them. And it's just ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. They're throwing rocks and hiding their hands. So now, if we can feed them, come in and try to do somebody. When this should have been done long years ago before this even got this far, this and that. You know what I'm saying? You know, right?
Yeah. Yes, sir. And I think that's what you were saying also, Attorney.
No, it is. I mean, I think that on the federal side, we could have done a much better job for Selma.
Well, you're here now, and so we can pick up from here and move forward. Thank you for calling, caller. We need to take this last break. I'm going to be at the coffee shop this morning also. They're having a 7-year anniversary, and they got every hour they're doing, what is it, 7 hours of goodness. Each hour they do something different. The 7 o'clock hour was the love hour. That's the one I wanted to make sure. I wanted to stay away from that one. They're going to give you a love potion in their coffee. So, but they're going to be doing 1 hour. They're going to do cheesecakes, and 10 o'clock. I'm assuming that this is not the last time that you'll be with us. That you'll be coming back to be a guest as well. Also,
no, that's right, Randy. I appreciate the invitation this morning. Good to be with you and talk to your callers. And anytime you want us to come on and be happy to do that. I will be up here a good bit because, like I said, we've got some catching up to do in Selma, and we've spent a lot of time in Mobile and Baldwin County, and for good reasons, because that's where our population centers are. But I think the emphasis needs to be on Selma. It will be during my term. Is there a number that you like to give for people to contact you, or is there a way for people to contact you that are listening who may have further questions, or a way that you do that? Yeah, I mean, you can call the U.S. Attorney's Office in Mobile. My assistant there is Brenda Howell. That number, if I'm remembering right, is area code 251-415-7112. But if some reason you don't get her through that, Brenda kind of manages my schedule and can get me. I'd be happy to talk to any of you. You can look us up in the phone book or online, and you can find us that way. And look forward to meeting as many of you as I can out there. We'll get some notice about some of the meetings we're going to have, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much, and thank you, Ms. Van. It's always a pleasure seeing you also, and looking forward to working with you, and looking forward to Weed and Seed. And folks, for those of you who know who I'm working with in these different organizations, here we are. We're getting ready to make something happen, the good Lord willing. Stay tuned for Fox News. Up next on 1490 WHBB Selma, it is 9 o'clock on the Great Awakening.